Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Porch. Tonight we're drifting into a lost world, a land of strange beasts that no longer walk, swim, or fly beside us, yet still profoundly shape the planet we know. This is the realm of extinct animals, creatures that once breathed under alien skies, moved through vanished forests, and followed rhythms the Earth itself has since forgotten. Their stories are written in stone, ice, amber, and memory, waiting patiently for curious minds to notice them again. As we wander through these ancient worlds, we'll sense how fragile and extraordinary life can be. Some of these beings ruled their environments for ages beyond imagination, while others flickered briefly, leaving only faint traces behind. Together, they form a long, winding narrative of change, chance, resilience, and loss. It is a story that feels distant, yet strangely close, reminding us that the living world is always in motion, always becoming something new. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is slow down, let your shoulders soften, let your breathing deepen, and allow your thoughts to grow quieter as we journey into this ancient world. Let's begin. Earth has had 5 great mass extinctions, each resetting life's story. Extinction is not only a tale of single species disappearing. At several points in deep time, the planet experienced global crises so severe that huge portions of life were erased. These events were different in their causes, but similar in their consequences. Food webs collapsed, oceans changed chemistry, climates swung, and long-established groups vanished, clearing space for new ones to rise. After one of these resets, reefs rebuilt with different architects. After another, forests and animals reorganized into unfamiliar patterns. The most famous is the asteroid impact that ended the reign of non-bird dinosaurs. But other mass extinctions were driven by enormous volcanic eruptions, shifting sea levels, and rapid warming or cooling. What matters is the idea of reset. Life does not always move smoothly forward. Sometimes it breaks and then remakes itself with whatever survivors remain. This perspective turns fossils into more than curiosities. They become chapters in a planetary biography, showing that Earth's living surface is dynamic, vulnerable, and endlessly creative after catastrophe. The giant beaver constructed ponds using teeth as large as bananas. It takes a familiar creature and enlarges it into something that feels nearly unbelievable. Its front teeth were massive, designed for heavy labor, and, like those of all beavers, they were self-sharpening, meaning each use kept the cutting edge keen. In Ice Age North America, an animal like this could reshape wetlands through feeding, digging, and changing vegetation, forming watery pockets that draw birds, insects, and fish. Even if its construction habits were not identical to modern beavers, its influence on the landscape would still have been deep, because a large herbivore focused on watery environments becomes a kind of ecosystem engineer. Picture approaching a pond at dusk and watching a broad-backed animal slide into the water, sending ripples outward like rings in a quiet world. Wetlands are engines of biodiversity, and creatures that sustain them help create entire communities. When this giant beaver vanished, it was not only the loss of an impressive rodent. It was the loss of a natural engineer, one that helped decide where water gathered and where life flourished. Woolly rhinoceroses once grazed icy grasslands across Eurasia. In the Ice Age, there were plains so cold and open they looked like frozen oceans of grass, and across them walked a rhinoceros built for winter. Its body carried a thick coat, and its shape was compact, conserving warmth the way a sturdy cabin holds heat. Instead of browsing trees, it fed on low plants, scraping aside snow to reach dry grasses that other animals could not easily access. Fossils and frozen remains show a creature that was not merely surviving the cold, but thriving in it. Part of a busy community of steppe life that included horses, bison, and towering mammoths. Those famous horns were not just for show. They could be used to clear snow, to spar, and to defend territory on windswept ground where hiding was impossible. When climate shifted and habitat shrank, this winter specialist lost its advantage, and the world warmed past its design. A meteor impact ended the age of non-bird dinosaurs in a geological instant. In Earth's history, there are moments that feel like a door slamming. This event lifts a global signature that geologists can trace, including unusual chemical markers and evidence of extreme shock, suggesting an impact powerful enough to change the planet's atmosphere. The aftermath would have been chaos on a scale that is hard to grasp. Intense heat near the impact region, enormous waves in nearby seas, and a sky choked with dust and soot that altered sunlight and cooled temperatures. Food webs depend on steady energy from the sun, so when that energy is disrupted, consequences cascade from plants to herbivores to predators. What makes this moment so chilling is the speed. Many changes in nature are gradual, but this was abrupt enough to be visible as a boundary in rock layers across the world. It reminds us that life can be resilient over vast spans, yet still vulnerable to rare catastrophes. After the dust settled, the survivors faced a reshaped planet, and evolution began writing a new chapter with a different cast. Hobbit humans lived on Flores, sharing islands with giant stalks. On the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists uncovered remains of a small-bodied human relative that challenges our sense of what human can look like. This was not a child or a myth. It was an adult hominin with a compact build, adapted to island life in ways that still spark debate and wonder. Islands often reshape animals through limited food, isolation, and unusual dangers. And Flores seems to have been a laboratory for that kind of evolution. The same island also hosted outsized birds, including huge storks that would have felt like living centuries in the landscape, tall enough to make a person look twice. Imagine sharing narrow valleys and forest edges with birds that can stare down from above while you navigate volcanic terrain and shifting seasons. The most fascinating part is the coexistence. It turns prehistory into a vivid scene, not a dusty timeline. Different forms of humans, strange island giants, and real daily survival, all sharing one small patch of Earth. Mammoths still roamed Earth while humans painted caves in Europe. Picture a cold steppe where shaggy giants move like slow-living hills, their tusks sweeping snow aside to reach winter grass. At the very same time, nearby humans are making art by firelight, pressing pigment onto stone walls and leaving behind animal shapes that can still stop us in our tracks. That overlap is startling because it collapses time. Mammoths are not a distant fantasy creature from an unreachable era. They were part of a real world with people who laughed, worried, traveled, and watched the same herds crossing the horizon. Their bodies were tuned for ice, with dense fur, thick fat, and small ears that conserved heat. When you see a cave painting of a mammoth, you are looking at an eyewitness moment, a meeting between imagination and an animal that could shake the ground with every step. The dodo vanished within a lifetime of its first European meeting. On a small island in the Indian Ocean, this chunky, flightless bird had lived without mammal predators for so long that fear was not a useful skill. Then ships began to arrive, and the rules of survival changed faster than evolution could respond. Sailors and settlers hunted, but the deeper danger came with what they carried. Pigs, rats, and other introduced animals raided nests, eating eggs and chicks in a place where ground nesting had once been safe. Forests were altered, and the dodo's limited range meant there was nowhere else to retreat. The speed of its disappearance matters because it shows extinction is not always a slow fade. It can be a sudden door closing. The dodo became a symbol of loss, but it was also a warning written in feathers. When an entire species exists in one small home, a few careless years can erase it forever. Cyberto cats were not dinosaurs, yet lived beside early humans. These famous predators belong to the mammal world, not the age of dinosaurs. And that makes their story feel uncomfortably close. In many places, humans did not just find their bones, they shared landscapes with them. Imagine a twilight plain where large prey gather at water, and danger can arrive without a sound. Saber-toothed cats were built for power, with thick forelimbs that could wrestle a struggling animal down. Their long canines were less like knives and more like delicate tools that demanded the right technique, a precise bite after the prey was controlled. That hunting style paints a picture of careful strategy, not mindless brutality. For early people, these cats were competition and threat, and likely a source of deep respect. When we find their fossils near ancient camps and kill sites, it hints at a tense relationship. Two clever hunters reading the same land. Some extinct penguin stood as tall as a grown human. It is strange to imagine a penguin not as a cute bundle of black and white, but as a towering, heavy bird that could look you in the eye. Long ago, after the extinction of certain marine reptiles, and before seals and toothy whales fully filled the oceans, penguins experimented with size. In cooler waters rich with fish and squid, bigger bodies could store more heat and dive longer. Their wings became powerful flippers, and their bones grew dense, helping them sink and maneuver underwater like living torpedoes. On land, they would have waddled, but in the sea, they were built for speed and endurance. Fossils show these giants lived in places that today feel familiar, such as coasts of the southern continents, which makes them feel less mythical and more like a missed encounter. If such a penguin walked a modern beach, it would not look like a novelty. It would look like a ruler of the shore. Trilobites thrived for hundreds of millions of years, then disappeared forever. Trilobites are a reminder that success does not guarantee survival. They filled ancient seas in dazzling variety, from tiny species that sifted mud to spiny forms that looked armored for battle. Their bodies were segmented like a carefully engineered machine, and some could roll up into a tight bore, turning soft bellies inward and presenting a tough outer shield. Their eyes are one of the most astonishing details. Many were compound, but made from minerals built like tiny lenses that survived long after softer parts vanished. For an almost unimaginable span of time, they adapted through changing oceans, shifting continents, and new predators.
Then came a series of crises that rewrote marine life, and trilobites did not make it through the final one. The world moved on without them.
When you hold a trilobite fossil, you are holding both endurance and fragility. A creature that ruled its era and still could not outrun planetary change. The passenger pigeon once darkened skies, then became completely gone. There was a time in North America when a flock could stretch from horizon to horizon, so dense it dimmed daylight like a moving eclipse. The sound was said to be thunderous, a living storm of wings. Their numbers were not just a curiosity, they were an ecological force. Massive roosts broke branches, fertilized forests, and reshaped habitats, and many other species lived in the wake of that abundance. Then industrial kale hunting arrived, and the pigeons faced a trap built from their own biology. They depended on huge colonies for breeding and safety, and once the flocks were shattered, recovery became harder with every season. Railroads and telegraphs helped hunters track them, turning a natural wonder into a commercial target. The final chapter is painfully quiet. A species that once seemed endless dwindled to a few captive birds. When the last one died, it proved the chilling lesson. Even the most common creature can vanish. Phylohines looked like dogs, carried pouches, and had tiger stripes. This animal was a masterclass in nature's surprises. A carnivorous marsupial that wore the outline of a dog while carrying its young in a pouch like a kangaroo. Its striped back gave it a tiger-like nickname, but it was its own unique branch of life shaped by Australia's long isolation. Phylohines hunted with stealth and patience, and their jaws could open wide, giving them an almost unreal expression in old footage. They once ranged across mainland Australia and New Guinea, then survived mainly in Tasmania after pressures changed elsewhere. Later, fear, misunderstanding, and bounties pushed them into fewer and fewer corners. People blamed them for livestock losses, though other predators and dogs often played a role. Captive individuals were kept, filmed, and then lost, turning the thyloin into one of the most haunting modern extinctions, because it happened in the age of cameras. It is not ancient history. It is recent enough to feel like a mistake we could still undo if time allowed. Giant ground sloths could stand and reach leaves like small giraffes. These were not the tree-hugging sloths of today, but enormous plant eaters that could rise up on hind legs and turn their bodies into living towers. With strong hips and heavy tails, some could brace like a tripod, freeing their forelimbs to pull branches closer. Their claws were long and curved, not for speed, but for grasping and ripping vegetation, and possibly for defense when threatened. In Ice Age landscapes, they would have shaped plant communities simply by feeding, opening patches of forest and creating pathways in dense growth. Their bones show powerful muscles, and their sheer size hints at a world where big bodies were a successful strategy against predators and cold. Humans arrived into that world and met these giants face to face. In some regions, their disappearance lines up with rapid ecological change and hunting pressure, suggesting a complicated ending. What remains is the eerie sense that entire categories of animals once existed, doing jobs in ecosystems that no longer have replacements. Ancient sharks with spiral tooth whorls once ruled strange seas. Among the most surreal fossils in the ocean's history are sharks whose teeth did not shed and scatter the way modern sharks do. Instead, new teeth rolled forward in a spiral, forming a curling, saw-like structure that sat in the jaw like a coiled weapon. The exact appearance is still debated because cartilage rarely fossilizes, but the tooth whorl itself is unmistakable. A tight swirl of enamel and dread. These sharks lived long before people, in seas filled with unfamiliar fish and early marine reptiles. And they likely hunted soft-bodied prey like squid, slicing and gripping with emotion unlike any living predator. What makes them so fascinating is that they show evolution experimenting wildly, building solutions that feel almost impossible until you see them preserved in stone. Their world was not just a smaller version of ours. It was a different ocean entirely, with different rules, where a shark could carry a spiral of teeth and thrive. When such lineages vanish, they take whole blueprints of life with them. Irish elk carried antlers wider than most doorways. This animal is often called an elk, but it was really an enormous deer with a crown of bone that looked almost unreal. The antlers could extend wider than a person's fully outstretched arms, transforming the head into a living chandelier. That extraordinary scale was likely supported by lush grazing grounds and intense competition during mating seasons, where display could matter as much as raw strength. But antlers are costly. They must be grown, carried, and eventually shed, requiring calories and minerals on a strict timetable. When you picture these deer moving through open woodland and meadow, it becomes clear why wide antlers would thrive in spaces with room to move. In thicker forests, they turn cumbersome, catching and slowing progress. Their immense headgear points to a world that once offered plentiful resources and broad habitats. And their disappearance suggests that when landscapes and food availability shifted, even a master of display could be pushed beyond its limits. Beauty can become a burden when conditions grow severe. Steller's sea cow was hunted to extinction within just a few decades. In the cold waters near the Commander Islands, a gentle giant once drifted through kelp forests like a slow-moving barge of life. It was related to manatees and dugongs, but far larger, perfectly adapted to icy seas, with thick skin and a massive body built to retain heat. It fed by grazing seaweed, an underwater grazer that helped shape coastal ecosystems simply by eating and moving. Then shipwrecks and hunting entered the story. Sailors prized its meat and fat because it was reliable food in a harsh, remote place. The tragedy is the speed. A creature that had survived storms, seasons, and predators for ages was wiped out in a shockingly short human chapter. Because it lived in a limited region and moved slowly, it could not escape pressure once hunters found it. Its loss is a sharp lesson that even the ocean's most peaceful giants can be erased quickly when demand meets vulnerability. Great orcs were flightless seabirds hunted into silence. On northern coasts, these birds once stood upright like solemn little sentinels, built for swimming rather than flying. Their wings were short and strong, perfect for chasing fish underwater with quick, efficient strokes. On land, they were awkward, and that clumsiness became their undoing. People could approach nesting colonies and take adults, eggs, and feathers in huge numbers. Feathers filled bedding, oil-fed lamps, and the birds themselves became food. Their breeding strategy made things worse. They gathered in predictable places, returning to the same rocky sites,
trusting the routines that had worked for millennia. As colonies shrank, they lost the safety of numbers. The final individuals were pursued as prized specimens, a grim twist where rarity increased danger. Their story is haunting because it shows how a body designed beautifully for one world, the sea, can be helpless in another. The shore.
When they disappeared, an entire style of seabird life vanished with them. The Carolina parakeet was North America's only native parrot. It is startling to remember that bright parrots once flashed through forests and river bottoms in the eastern United States. Their green bodies and warm lead faces made them vivid against leaves, and their calls would have been unmistakable, a tropical sound in a temperate world. They fed on seeds and fruit, traveling in social flocks that could strip a tree and then move on like a gust of color. Yet those same flocking habits made them easy targets. People shot them for feathers, and because they sometimes fed in orchards. And when one bird was down, others might circle back, drawn by social bonds, only to be killed too. As forests were cleared and nesting sites vanished, their world fractured into smaller pieces. Captive birds lingered briefly, but the wild voice of the species fell silent. This extinction hits differently because it rewrites what we think belongs in North America. A native parrot feels like a surprise, and that surprise makes its absence even sharper. Host's eagle hunted giant moa, and both later vanished. On ancient New Zealand, the food chain had a dramatic twist. There were no native land mammals large enough to be top predators, so a bird became the hunter, and it hunted birds. Host's eagle was massive, with powerful legs and talons built to strike with devastating force. Its prey included moa, huge, flightless herbivores that browsed forests like living cranes without wings. Picture the tension in that ecosystem. A giant bird of prey dropping from above onto another giant bird, turning forest clearings into hunting grounds. This was not a delicate raptor snatching mice. It was a heavyweight predator, taking down animals many times its own mass through surprise and precision. Then humans arrived, hunting more and changing habitats. And the eagle's fate followed its prey. When a specialist loses the cornerstone of its diet, power becomes pointless. The paired disappearance is a reminder that extinctions ripple through relationships. Remove one key species, and another can collapse like a bridge with its central support removed. Moa birds were taller than ostriches and completely windless. These giants walked New Zealand's forests and valleys with no need for flight because the islands lacked land predators that would force a quick escape into the air. Over time, wings became unnecessary weight, and some moa lineages lost them entirely, leaving no external trace, not even small stubs. Instead, they invested in strong legs, big bodies, and a browsing lifestyle, reaching leaves and twigs at heights other herbivores could not. Their presence would have shaped plant communities, trimming certain branches, spreading seeds, and creating trails through undergrowth. What makes them so compelling is how normal they were within their own world. A person living there could have seen them daily, like deer in a modern forest. Then that ordinary giant vanished. Hunting and habitat change likely hit them hard because they reproduced slowly and lived only on those islands. Today, their huge bones feel like props from a fantasy tale. Yet they belong to a recent past. The world once held towering wingless birds, and then suddenly it did not. A quagga was a zebra relative with stripes only on front. This animal looked like it was halfway between two worlds, with bold zebra striping on the head and shoulders
that faded into a plain brown body toward the back. That unusual pattern made it instantly recognizable, and also made it a symbol of how much diversity can exist even within familiar groups. It lived in southern Africa's grasslands, sharing space with other grazing animals and adapting to local conditions that shaped its appearance. Then came heavy hunting and competition with livestock. Because it was considered an ordinary animal at the time, few people thought it needed protection. By the time anyone realized it was truly disappearing, the decline was already too far along. The last individuals lived in captivity, and once they were gone, the quagga became a lesson in hindsight. It also became a scientific landmark later because preserved remains helped show how close it was to other zebras and how variation within a species can be lost before we even recognize it as special. Tasmanian tigers could open their jaws astonishingly wide for a marsupial. Old films show a captive animal yawning, and the mouth opens into a dramatic arc that feels almost impossible, as if the skull is hinged like a trap.
That wide gape likely helped it grasp prey, and may have been paired with strong jaw muscles designed for holding and tearing. Yet, the fascination is tangled with certainness, because those films are among the last moving glimpses of a vanished predator. It lived in a world of eucalyptus forests, rugged hills, and night hunting. And it carried its young in a pouch, a reminder that mammals can evolve similar hunting roles through completely different family trees. The tragedy is that it became a target of fear and rumor. Bounties encouraged killing, and as numbers dropped, every remaining animal became more vulnerable to chance, disease, and isolation. The wide jaws are memorable, but the deeper story is about misunderstanding. A unique predator was treated as a nuisance, and the result was a silence that still echoes in Tasmania's imagination. The Barbados raccoon vanished before most people knew it existed. On small islands, evolution can create strange local versions of familiar animals, and then erase them just as quickly. This raccoon was a distinct island form, living in a limited place where a single hurricane, a new predator, or a shift in land use could change everything. When humans alter an island, there is often no second habitat, no distant population waiting to replenish losses. That fragile geography makes extinction feel less like a slow decline and more like a switch being flipped. What makes this raccoon especially haunting is how little time it had in the spotlight. It disappeared before it could become part of widespread stories. Before most people could even picture it, that kind of loss is easy to overlook, yet it is common. Many extinctions are quiet, happening to small populations in small places, without famous last photos or museum crowds. They remind us that the planet's biodiversity is not only made of giants and legends, it is also made of local wonders, each one a unique answer to the question of how to live. The aurochs was the wild ancestor of modern cattle. Imagine meeting a cow that looks like it belongs in a myth. Tall at the shoulder, long-horned and built like a living battering ram. That was the aurochs, a wild bull that once roamed Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia, shaping grasslands the way bison do today. Herds moved through forests and open country, grazing, trampling, and spreading seeds, while predators and humans watched for chances. Over time, people began taking calves, keeping them close, and selecting the gentler animals, slowly turning a fierce wild creature into the calmer cattle that now fill farms worldwide. It is a strange thought that so many everyday foods and livelihoods trace back to a beast that was once dangerous to approach. The aurochs did not fade because it was weak. It disappeared because its world was carved up by hunting and shrinking habitat. Yet its legacy still stands in every barnyard, a domesticated echo of wild power. The last known bluebuck disappeared before photographs were invented. The bubak is one of the most haunting kinds of extinction, the sort that slips away before the modern world can truly notice. It was a small antelope from southern Africa, described as having a subtle bluish sheen in its coat, a detail that sounds almost like a trick of light. But the animal was real and its range was small, which made it easy to erase once hunting pressure and land changes intensified. Because it vanished before photography, we are left with a fog of second-hand descriptions, a few preserved skins, and museum specimens that feel like whispers rather than portraits. That absence changes how the extinction feels. There is no final film clip, no clear last image to hold on to. Only the uneasy knowledge that a species can disappear without leaving a vivid face behind. The bluebuck also reminds us that rarity is not always ancient. Sometimes a creature becomes rare in a blink, and once it crosses that invisible line, recovery becomes almost impossible, even if people later regret what happened. The Falkland Islands wolf was the only native land mammal there. On the windswept Falkland Islands far out in the South Atlantic, there once lived a fox-like canid found nowhere else on Earth. It was the island's only native land mammal, which meant it occupied a solitary position within that ecosystem, a top scavenger and predator in a place shaped by seabirds and severe weather. Early visitors noted that it showed little fear of humans, likely because it had evolved without ever needing to see people as a danger. That quiet curiosity proved fatal once settlers arrived with livestock and new ideas about what should be considered a pest. As sheep farming expanded, the animal was blamed for losses and hunted without pause, with little chance to escape, because an island offers no distant refuge. Its story is also one of uncertainty, as people still debate how a canid reached such remote islands in the first place, whether by ancient land bridges, ice, or drifting across water. However it came to be there, it became something unique, and then it was wiped away, leaving the islands with a missing piece of their natural identity. The Baiji dolphin disappeared from the Yangtze faster than science could protect it. The Yangtze River once carried a pale, shy dolphin, adapted to murky water and crowded currents, navigating by sound in a world where visibility could vanish without warning. The Baiji was sometimes called a river goddess in local tradition, a gentle presence in a vast waterway. But modern pressure came like a tide that never went out. Heavy boat traffic, fishing gear, habitat disruption, and pollution stacked threat upon threat, turning the river into a difficult place for any large animal to survive. What makes this extinction especially painful is the timing. It happened in an era of conservation awareness when scientists were actively searching, counting, and pleading for protection. Yet the decline was so steep that by the time serious action was widely attempted, there were too few individuals left to recover. The bai became a symbol of how quickly a species can drop from endangered to functionally gone. Especially in freshwater systems where animals cannot simply swim away to a cleaner ocean. When it vanished, it was not just a dolphin lost, it was a whole river story ending. The golden toad disappeared after a sudden crash in sightings. In the cloud forests of Costa Rica, there once lived a small amphibian, but looked like a spark fallen to earth, glowing with a rich golden color against moss and wet leaves. For years, it appeared reliably during breeding season, gathering in numbers that felt almost like a yearly miracle. Then, abruptly, the sightings collapsed. People searched and waited, returning to familiar pools, listening for movement, hoping for a flash of gold, and finding nothing. The suddenness is part of what makes the golden toad unforgettable. It became one of the most famous examples of an extinction that seems tied to a web of forces, including shifting weather patterns, habitat sensitivity, and disease that can sweep through amphibian populations like andrant, invisible fire. Because amphibians breathe through skin and live between water and land, they can act like early warning signals for environmental stress. The golden toad's disappearance was not only the loss of a beautiful species,
It was also a message, sharp and unsettling, about how delicate life can be in a changing climate, even in protected places. The dusky seaside sparrow vanished from a single small marshland home. Some extinctions happen on a grand stage, but this one unfolded in a narrow strip of habitat in marshes where reeds sway and the ground itself is waterlood and alive. The dusky seaside sparrow lived in a specific part of Florida's coastal wetlands, and that tight range made it extremely vulnerable. When marshes were drained, altered, or sprayed to control mosquitoes, the sparrow's world shrank like a rug pulled out from under it. The bird did not have mountains to flee to or distant forests to recolonize. It had one home, and when that home changed, its options vanished. What makes its story especially poignant is that it disappeared in a time when people were already beginning to understand endangered species, and there were attempts to intervene. But timing matters.
When a population becomes too small, even well-meaning efforts can arrive too late because there are too few mates, too little genetic diversity, and too much chance involved in every storm and season. This sparrow's loss is a quiet warning that protecting a species often means protecting a place, down to the very reeds and mud it needs. Elephant birds laid eggs big enough to feed several people. On Madagascar, there once lived birds so large their eggs feel almost unbelievable, like someone scaled a familiar object far beyond its natural limits. Elephant birds were towering, flightless, and heavy, and their eggs were enormous, with volumes many times greater than a chicken egg. An egg like that was a concentrated package of nutrition, and for humans arriving on the island, it would have been a tempting resource, easy to collect compared to hunting a massive adult. Those eggs also tell us something about reproduction. Large birds often lay fewer eggs and invest heavily in each one, which can be a successful strategy in stable environments, but a risky one when new predators and people appear. Madagascar's ecosystems were already unique, filled with animals found nowhere else, and elephant birds were part of that strange, rich tapestry. When they vanished, it was not only the loss of a giant, it was the loss of a whole style of life on the island. A huge herbivore role removed from the landscape. Today, surviving eggshell fragments feel like pieces of a vanished world. Delicate evidence of an animal that once walked through Madagascar's forests with the weight of a living boulder. The Malagasy hippopotamus was a small island cousin of river giants. Madagascar once hosted hippos that were not the huge river bruisers most people picture, but smaller, island-shaped versions, adapted to a different kind of life. Some likely spent time in wetlands and rivers, while others may have been more comfortable on land than their mainland relatives, moving through forests and marsh edges in a world without the same predators. Island environments often push animals towards surprising sizes and behaviors, because food, competition, and terrain rewrite the usual rules. These hippos would have shared Madagascar with giant birds, strange carnivores, and lemurs that grew to sizes we would barely recognize today. Their disappearance fits a familiar island pattern. When humans arrive, landscapes shift through burning, farming, and hunting. And animals that evolved in isolation can struggle with the new pace of change. A hippo on an island cannot simply move upstream for miles to find a safer region. The map ends. That is why island extinctions can feel so final and so fast.
The Malagasy hippos were part of a uniquely Madagascan chapter of evolution, and their loss narrowed the island's already precious diversity. The giant lemurs of Madagascar were as heavy as adult humans. Today's lemurs feel like delicate, wide-eyed creatures of the trees, but Madagascar once held lemurs that would have seemed almost unreal, heavy-bodied and powerful, with sizes approaching that of an adult person. Some were likely slow and deliberate, built for climbing and gripping rather than leaping, and their feeding habits would have shaped forests by pruning branches and spreading seeds in ways smaller animals cannot. Imagine the sound of a large primate moving through a canopy at night. The rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, and the sense that something substantial is above you, not a small shadow. These giant lemurs evolved in isolation alongside other unusual animals in ecosystems that had no monkeys and no apes, which makes their rise even more remarkable.
Their disappearance is closely tied to human arrival and landscape change, with hunting pressure likely playing a role, because large animals provide more food per kill and tend to reproduce slowly. Losing them was not only losing a species, it was losing a set of ecological jobs that helped maintain Madagascar's forests. In a way, some of the island's modern environmental challenges echo that ancient absence. The Rodrigo solitaire was a close cousin of the dodo. On Rodriguez, a small island in the Indian Ocean, lived a bird related to the dodo, yet different enough to have its own strange personality in the record of history. It was flightless, ground-dwelling, and adapted to an island life where energy could be spent on strong legs and sturdy bodies instead of wings. Reports suggest it had a distinctive build and behavior, including strong territorial instincts, and it likely fed on fruits and seeds in forests that once covered the island. Like many island birds, it had nowhere else to go. When humans arrived, they brought hunting, habitat disturbance, and introduced animals that could raid nests. The combination is often deadly because island species tend to evolve without the instinct to fear new predators, and their populations are naturally limited by small land area. The solitaire's extinction is a reminder that the dodo was not a lonely tragedy. It was part of a broader wave of island losses, a pattern repeated across oceans. Each one is like a library burned before we finished reading it, leaving only fragments and guesses about what daily life on those islands truly sounded like. Smilden's saber teeth were fragile, so it needed powerful neck muscles. Those famous fangs looked like nature built a perfect weapon, but they came with a catch. Long, thin teeth can snap if they hit bone the wrong way. So this cat could not simply bite and thrash like many modern predators. Instead, it was engineered for control. Stocky forelimbs helped pin large prey, turning the hunt into a wrestling match where the animal's weight and leverage mattered more than a long chase. Then the neck and shoulders took over, driving a careful, deep bite into softer targets. It is a style of hunting that feels almost surgical, like a specialist with one extraordinary tool and strict rules for using it safely. That fragility also explains why these cats are often imagined as ambushers,
choosing close-range attacks where the first moments decide everything. Their fossils tell a story of strength built around a delicate edge, a reminder that evolution often trades speed for power and brute force for precision. Direwolves were real and distinct from today's gray wolves. It is tempting to think of them as simply bigger, gay wolves, but they were their own kind of wolf, shaped by a different world. They lived across Ice Age North America in a landscape filled with oversized prey.
And their build suggests a predator made for strength and endurance, not light-footed sprinting. Imagine packs working together around massive herbivores, relying on teamwork and pressure rather than a single quick strike. Their teeth and jaws were suited to hard use, the kind of use you need when meals are large, dangerous, and not easily wasted. When the Ice Age ended, many of the biggest prey animals declined or disappeared, and predator life became harder. Competition with other carnivores and changing ecosystems would have squeezed them from multiple sides. What remains today is a powerful example of how a familiar body plan can branch into different solutions. Wolves feel timeless, but the direwolf shows that even within a famous family, whole lineages can rise, dominate, and then vanish, leaving only bones and the lingering sense of what once prowled the open plains. The American lion was larger than most lions alive today. Picture a lion, but scaled up, with longer limbs and a frame built for hunting in wide open spaces. This big cat lived in North America during the Ice Age, sharing territory with other formidable predators and a buffet of large prey. Its size hints at a world where being bigger meant you could tackle bigger targets, push rivals away from a kill, and survive brutal seasons. Unlike the modern lion, which is tightly associated with African savannas, this lion belonged to a continent with glaciers, grasslands, and herds that included enormous bison and horses. The idea of a lion stalking prey beneath a very different sky makes the past feel both familiar and alien at once. It also reframes North America as a place that once had its own version of classic safari drama, complete with top predators built like living powerhouses. When such an animal disappears, it does not just remove a species, it removes a presence, the kind that changes how every other creature moves through the landscape. Short-faced bears were built for speed, not just size. Many people imagine ancient bears as slow giants, but this one breaks that expectation. With long legs, a tall shoulder line, and a face that seems compact and steep, it was built more like a runner than a lumbering scavenger. Its stride could cover ground efficiently, turning it into a roaming force that could patrol huge territories. That matters because speed changes the entire psychology of a predator. If you can arrive quickly, you can bully other carnivores away from kills, appear suddenly at carcasses, and make even confident hunters reconsider their plans. Some researchers believe it depended largely on scavenging and intimidation, while others suggest it could hunt when necessary, and both views create a striking picture. Either way, it was probably an animal that influenced the behavior of everything around it, including humans traveling across open landscapes. Its disappearance follows the broader pattern of Ice Age giants fading as ecosystems and prey communities shifted. The short-faced bear reminds us that danger in the past did not always rely on stealth. Sometimes it came from something immense that could still move far faster than you might expect. Cave lions lived in Ice Age Europe, sharing their world with mammoths. When you picture Europe during the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine only cold winds and empty plains. But it was also a stage for powerful predators. Cave lions moved through snowy valleys and open grasslands alongside mammoths and other large herbivores,
turning those spaces into hunting grounds. They were similar to modern lions, yet different enough to feel like a parallel version of a familiar animal, shaped by distinct prey and climates. Their presence is not just inferred from bones. In some places, humans painted them, capturing their outlines on cave walls, with the same careful attention given to horses and bison. That means people saw them, feared them, and remembered them vividly enough to make them part of art. Imagine the tension of living in a world where a large cat could be nearby in twilight, where tracks in snow might signal a predator moving through the same corridor you plan to travel. The cave lion's extinction removes a key character from Europe's ancient story, and it reminds us that the continent once held predators most people only associate with faraway landscapes today. The cave hyena once prowled Europe, far from modern African relatives. Hyenas feel like animals of Hupsavas, yet Europe once had its own powerful hyena that thrived in cooler climates. It was a bone-crushing specialist, built to make use of every scrap of a carcass, including tough parts other predators leave behind. That ability can make a species incredibly successful, because nothing goes to waste. Evidence of these hyenas shows up in caves and dens where bones are piled and chewed, creating natural archives of ancient ecosystems. Each gnawed fragment is a clue about what lived nearby, what was hunted, what was scavenged, and how food moved through the landscape. This hyena likely competed with wolves, lions, and humans, and its presence would have added an extra layer of danger around kills and carcasses. Imagine approaching a dead animal for meat or hide and realizing you are not the only one who noticed it. The cave hyena story also shows how animal ranges can be astonishingly different in the past. Europe was not just a land of deer and bears. It had fierce scavengers with jaws like tools, shaping the fate of bones and the survival of other hunters. The scimitar cat was a swift hunter with shorter blades than Smilodon. Not all saber-toothed cats wore the same style of weapon. The scimitar cat carried shorter, more curved canines shaped like elegant blades rather than oversized daggers. That difference likely changed how it hunted. Shorter teeth can be less fragile, which may have allowed a more active, faster pursuit, especially in open habitats where a chase is possible. Imagine a predator built like an athlete with long limbs and a body tuned for quick acceleration, closing distance before prey can fully react. Its teeth still demanded precision, but they might have offered a wider margin for error, letting the cat strike efficiently and move on. This variation is what makes extinct predators so fascinating. They are not just bigger versions of modern animals. They are experiments in design, each one exploring a different balance of speed, power, and risk. The scimitar cat's disappearance removes a distinct hunting strategy from the world's playbook. When lineages vanish, it is not only animals that are lost. It is approaches to survival, entire solutions to the problem of catching dinner. Terror birds were giant flightless predators that ran down prey. Imagine meeting a bird that does not fly because it does not need to. It runs tall and fast, with a head like a living hammer and a beak built for delivering punishing strikes. Terror birds were predators on land, turning the bird body plan into something that could chase, corner, and overwhelm prey with speed and force. Their long legs suggest quick movement across open ground, and their skulls were often deep and robust, designed for impact. It is a chilling idea because it flips a familiar expectation. Birds are usually prey for larger animals, or small hunters of insects and fish. Here the bird is the threat, the top runner in the ecosystem. For many animals around them, the danger would have arrived upright and silent, closing the gap in long strides. Their story also reflects shifting continents and competition. As other predators expanded into new regions and environments changed, these specialized hunters lost their edge. The terror birds leave behind an unforgettable image of evolution's creativity, proving that nature can build a top predator out of almost any blueprint when the opportunity is right. The marsupial lion was Australia's top mammal predator, not a true lion. Australia's past had a predator that sounds like a riddle. It is called a lion, yet it was a marsupial, more closely related to wombats and koalas than to cats. That makes it one of the most striking examples of different animal families evolving similar roles. It likely hunted in forests and woodlands using powerful forelimbs and strong claws to grip prey, and it carried teeth shaped for slicing flesh rather than grinding plants. Its body was compact and muscular, built for sudden bursts and control, the kind of predator that does not need to outrun everything if it can ambush and hold on.
To imagine it is to imagine an Australia where giant marsupials moved through the landscape, and predators were just as unusual. When humans arrived and ecosystems shifted, many of these large animals disappeared, and the marsupial lion vanished with them. It is a reminder that Australia's modern wildlife is only a surviving fragment of a much stranger cast. The marsupial lion is not just an extinct species. It is a window into an alternate version of mammal history that once played out in isolation. Megalania was a giant monitor lizard that may have hunted early humans. There is something uniquely unsettling about a truly giant lizard, because it feels like a living echo of a deeper time. Megalania was an enormous monitor related to modern goas and Komodo dragons, but scaled up to a size that could have made it a serious threat to large animals. Imagine a predator with a low profile and a patient approach, able to wait, then surge forward with surprising speed, gripping with powerful jaws. Some scientists suggest it may have had venom, as some living monitor lizards do, which would add another layer of danger to a bite. Even without that, its size alone would have shaped the behavior of everything around it. In a landscape shared with giant marsupials and early people, it could have been both hunter and scavenger, arriving at carcasses or stalking the vulnerable. Its disappearance marks the end of a world where reptiles could sit near the top of the food chain on land, not just in water. Megalania makes the ancient past feel immediate. It is not hard to imagine hearing movement in scrubland and realizing the predator is not a mammal at all. Dumplosteus was an armored fish with jaws like living shears. It is hard to picture a fish that feels like a tank, but this one wore thick, bony plates like built-in body armor. Instead of teeth, it had resoride bone blades that met like a pair of cutters, turning its bite into a snapping machine. In ancient seas, where many animals were soft-bodied or slow to escape, that kind of weapon could end a chase in a heartbeat. Its head was the business end, heavy and reinforced, built to survive collisions and struggles at close range. Scientists think it could open its mouth quickly, creating suction that pulled prey inward before the jaws even closed, like a trap that also vacuums. Imagine being a smaller fish in those waters, feeling the pressure change, then vanishing into a helmeted predator. What makes it so fascinating is the design choice. Nature did not give it a mouth full of teeth. It gave it a pair of blades plus armor and let it rule through engineering.
When animals like this disappear, it feels like losing an entire genre of life. Hickopion carried a bizarre tooth spiral, like a saw blade roll.
Some fossils look like they were dreamed up for a fantasy movie.
And this is one of them. The creature's teeth grew in a tight spiral, a curling whorl that looks like a circular saw frozen in stone. For a long time, people argued about where that spiral even sat, because sharks are mostly cartilage, and cartilage rarely fossilizes. The best evidence now points to the whorl living in the lower jaw, with new teeth forming and rolling forward as older ones moved outward, all in one continuous conveyor. That means every meal was taken with a living scroll of blades. It likely hunted slippery prey, such as squid-like animals, where grabbing and slicing mattered more than crushing. There is also something oddly elegant about it. The spiral is not random chaos. It is ordered growth, a mathematical curve made of enamel and time. This animal reminds us that evolution does not always aim for familiar shapes.
Sometimes it invents something so strange that even scientists need decades to agree on how it worked. Megalodon's teeth suggest a shark built from massive, warm-blooded prey. You can learn a shocking amount about a vanished giant from what it left behind. And this shark mostly left teeth. They are thick, heavy, and built to handle extreme force. The kind you would need to bite into large animals that fight back. Those teeth hint at a predator that targeted big marine mammals, not just fish, turning the open ocean into a hunting ground for truly enormous meals. The idea is chilling because it reframes the sea as a place where even whales had to worry about being taken. Modern great whites are impressive, yet these teeth scale up that story into something almost unimaginable. It is also a reminder of how ecosystems can support giants. When conditions are right, with enough food, enough warm waters, and enough time, then conditions change, and even the biggest hunters can lose their advantage. When prey shifts, climates cool, and competition rises. Size can become a liability instead of a triumph. The teeth remain like punctuation marks in the fossil record. Each one acquired proof that the ocean once had a different top predator. Orthone cephalopods were straight-shelled hunters longer than many cars. Before squid and octopus took center stage, some of their ancient relatives lived inside long, straight shells, like living spears. These animals drifted or cruised through prehistoric seas, with tentacles at one end and a pointed shell stretching far behind, sometimes reaching lengths that feel more like a vehicle than a creature. Inside that shell were gas-filled chambers, adjusted like ballast tanks, helping the animal control buoyancy and depth. Picture a slow, patient hunter hovering in the water column, then reaching out with tentacles to seize fish and other prey that wander too close. The straight shell is especially striking because it breaks our expectation that nautilus-like shells must be curled. Here, the body plan goes in a different direction, turning the animal into a floating lance. It also suggests a different ocean style, where large, slow hunters could thrive because prey was abundant and predators were still evolving their counters. When these giants vanished, the seas did not just lose a species, they lost a silhouette that no modern ocean contains. Eureterids were sea scorpions that could grow to human length. Imagine wading in a shallow coastal lagoon and realizing the shadow beside you is not a fish, but a giant aeropod with grasping limbs. Eureterids, often called sea scorpions, were relatives of modern arachnids, and some grew to sizes that make the shoreline feel suddenly unsafe. They had armored bodies, jointed legs,
and specialized claws for grabbing, pinning, or tearing. Different species filled different roles, with some likely hunting actively and others waiting to ambush. Their habitats ranged from marine waters to brackish estuaries, places where salinity and tides shift constantly, which hints at tough adaptability. What makes them so captivating is the sense of scale. We're used to aeropods being small enough to swat away. This flips the relationship. In their world, a large Europarid could be the thing that chases you. Their extinction also shows how entire dynasties can fade when environments transform, when oxygen levels, coastlines, and competition rearrange the rules. The fossils leave behind a message written in armor plates. The sea once hosted monsters built on a blueprint we now associate with tiny creatures. Anomalocaris was an early ocean predator with grasping arms and strange mouthparts.
Long before familiar fish dominated the seas, this animal hunted in a world that feels almost alien. It had large, flexible arms up front, lined with spines for grabbing prey, and a circular mouth that looks like a ring of hard plates. The result is a predator built like a living clamp, reaching, trapping, and feeding with parts that do not resemble any single modern animal. It likely cruised above the seafloor, using broad flaps along its body to swim in smooth waves, then dropping onto targets in a sudden, controlled strike. What makes it so exciting is what it represents. It is one of the early experiments in being a top predator, appearing when ecosystems were still learning what predator could mean. It also reminds us that the first rulers of the food chain were not always sharks or reptiles. They were stranger, earlier designs with unfamiliar tools. When you see its fossils, you are looking at the moment the ocean first started to feel dangerous in a modern sense, with hunters built to chase and capture, rather than simply filter feed and drift. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a flexible snout like a vacuum hose. This creature seems designed to make you do a double take. 5 eyes sit on its head like tiny lamps, while a long, flexible snout extends forward and ends in a claw-like tip, perfect for grabbing. In a seafloor world filled with soft sediments and small animals hiding in the muck, that snout could probe, pinch, and lift prey from places a simple mouth could not reach. Its body was streamlined for swimming, with side flaps that likely moved in gentle waves and a tail that helped steer, making it both a cruiser and a careful forager. The 5 eyes are the detail that steals the spotlight. They suggest a visual system tuned to detecting movement and shape in a complex underwater scene, like having extra cameras on a submarine. But the Beinhi is fascinating not because it was huge or fierce, but because it shows how wildly creative early animal evolution could be. It is a reminder that normal body plans were not inevitable. The past tried out many options before settling into the familiar cast we see today. Eleucogenia was so weird, scientists first reconstructed it upside down. When the first fossils were studied, they looked like a creature from a child's imagination, and the confusion was understandable. It had long spines along one side and softer, tentacle-like legs along the other, plus a small head that was not obvious at first glance. Early reconstructions flipped it, placing spines as legs, because the true anatomy was difficult to interpret from flattened fossils. Later discoveries and improved analysis revealed the more accurate picture, showing that those spines were likely defensive armor, while the softer limbs helped it walk along the sea floor. That mistake is not embarrassing. It is deeply human, and it highlights how challenging it can be to rebuild life from scraps of ancient tissue. Eleucogenia is also a symbol of a time when animal designs were still branching in many directions. exploring forms that feel unlike anything alive today. The joy of its story is the detective work. The animal did not change. Our understanding did. And that shift reminds us that fossils are not just remains. They are puzzles that can surprise us for decades. The largest ammonites had shells wider than a bathtub. Ammonites were relatives of modern squid, but they carried external shells that curled into beautiful spirals, often ribbed and patterned like natural sculpture. Most were modest in size, but some grew into true giants with shells so wide they could dominate a rock face when found. Imagine encountering one of these in life, drifting or swimming in the open sea. The shell acting as both protection and buoyancy device, while the animal's soft body extended outward with arms ready to grasp prey. Their spiral is not just pretty, it is practical engineering, balancing strength, internal chambers, and hydrodynamics in a shape that distributes pressure well. Ammonites also became masters of variety, evolving countless shapes and ornaments over time, which is why they are so useful to scientists studying ancient rocks. But the giant ones do something else. They make the ancient ocean feel inhabited by grand, slow-moving presences like living shields. When ammonites vanished, they took that entire aesthetic with them. No modern sea creature carries a shell quite like that anymore, and the ocean feels visually poorer for it. Trilobites had compound eyes made from mineral crystals. Many animals have compound eyes, but trilobites did it in a way that feels almost like science fiction. Their lenses were made of kaolite, a mineral that fossilizes well, which means their vision system can survive when everything else disappears. That gives us an unusually intimate glimpse into how an extinct animal sensed the world. Different species carried different eye designs, each tuned to a particular way of life, from bright, shallow waters to dimmer depths. Some eyes held many lenses packed tightly together, while others were simpler, almost like a pared-down version of the same concept, reflecting different needs and different dangers. Imagine the ancient seafloor seen through those eyes, broken into a patchwork of tiny images. Movement would be sensed through shifting patterns of light and shadow. It is a reminder that vision itself has a history, and that the ways of seeing we now take for granted were shaped through experiments carried out across deep time. Those mineral lenses add a quiet, poetic note. Even after the animal is gone, its eyes remain, as if the fossil record preserved the very act of looking. Trilobite eyes are more than anatomy. They are proof that ancient oceans were observed, scanned, and interpreted by minds we will never encounter. Some extinct whales still possessed hind legs that revealed their land-based ancestry. Fossils capture a body plan in transition, like witnessing evolution mid-stride. These early whales had streamlined bodies and powerful swimming tails, yet they still carried small back limbs that no longer worked for walking. Those leftover legs may have helped with steering, stabilizing, or even mating. But their real importance is what they reveal. Whales did not appear fully formed in the ocean. They transitioned through coastal life, where swimming ability mattered more each generation, and land ability mattered less. You could almost imagine the lifestyle shift from wading and lunging at prey in shallow water to cruising farther offshore, where speed and breath control decided survival. Over time, the spine and tail became the main engine, and the hind limbs shrank into traces. It is one of the clearest stories of transformation we have. Not told with words, but with bones that still carry the memory of feet. Basilosaurus was a whale shaped like a sea serpent. Its body was stretched into a long, sinuous form that would have made the ancient ocean feel haunted. Early researchers even misidentified it at first because it did not match the whale shapes we know today. This was a time when whales were still experimenting with designs, and this one took the path of length, turning itself into a powerful, flexible predator. Picture warm coastal seas where large animals patrolled like living currents. And then, imagine a hunter sliding through that water with an almost reptile-like silhouette. Its movement would have been mesmerizing and unsettling. A giant that could approach without a splash, then strike with a mouth built for catching and holding. What makes it so fascinating is that it shows how many versions of whale once existed and how different the winners and losers of evolution can look. When it vanished, it took with it an entire shape of life, a form the ocean no longer carries. The giant shark, Cartericles, left teeth that dwarf modern great whites. A single tooth can feel like a relic from the monster story, thick as a finger and sharp along the edges like a serrated blade. Teeth like these imply a bite built for immense force, strong enough to cut through tough prey in one decisive clamp. Unlike many fossils, shark teeth are common and durable, so they turn up like clues scattered along coasts and buried in ancient seabeds, hinting at a predator that once ranged widely. The scale suggests a hunter capable of targeting large marine mammals, not just fish, making the open ocean a place where size was not always safety. There is also something eerie about how the animal is mostly known through teeth alone, as if the ocean kept its smile but erased the rest. When such a top predator disappears, the whole food web relaxes into a new shape. The throne at the top does not stay empty, but the feeling of the sea changes. Ancient sea turtles grew far larger than any swimming today. Some prehistoric turtles carried shells so massive they would have felt like living islands, gliding through the water with slow certainty. A body that large is not only impressive, it changes how an animal lives. It can travel farther without stopping, store more energy, and withstand colder water. While predators are forced to rethink their chances, imagine one rising to breathe, a broad dome breaking the surface like a quiet boulder, then sinking again into blue depth with steady flipper strokes. These giants likely fed in rich coastal zones and open waters, shaping habitats by grazing and stirring sediments, leaving subtle ecological fingerprints wherever they went. Their existence also highlights how generous the ocean once was, able to support travelers of extreme size. Over time, changing climates and shifting marine communities narrowed what was possible, and the truly colossal forms faded away. Modern sea turtles still inspire awe, but these ancient giants remind us that the ocean's past held even larger, calmer titans. The marine reptile mosasaur was a lizard cousin, not a dinosaur. It is a thrilling twist that one of the sea's most fearsome hunters came from a lizard-like family tree. Built for water, it carried a long body, strong tail power, and jaws designed to seize prey in a world with no solid ground to flee to. In the late age of dinosaurs, these reptiles became dominant ocean predators, turning coastal waters into places where danger could rise from below at any moment. Imagine fish scattering in sudden bursts, seabirds hesitating over a wave line, and smaller hunters giving way when a larger shadow arrives. Their anatomy hints at speed and control. A predator that could change direction quickly and strike with confidence. The lizard connection makes them even more unsettling, because it turns a familiar modern idea, a large monitor lizard, into something ocean-sized. When they disappeared, it marked the end of a marine dynasty that had climbed to the top through a surprising route, proving that the sea rewards any lineage that can adapt fast enough. Plesiosaurs had long necks built for ambush, not speed. That elegant neck was not a decoration. It was likely a hunting tool, letting the head reach prey while the bulky body stayed farther back, less noticeable in the water. Instead of racing after fast fish, this animal may have relied on patience, hovering quietly and then snapping forward with a quick strike. The body and flippers were built for controlled swimming and stability, like an underwater platform, while the neck acted like a flexible extension that could probe and dart. Imagine a calm coastal scene where small fish gather, thinking the large shape in the distance is harmless or too slow to matter. Then the neck moves first, and the hunt is already decided before the prey understands the threat. This is what says ambush, not chase. The shape is famous because it feels so unusual, yet it likely worked beautifully in the right setting. When plesiosaurs vanished, they left behind one of the most iconic silhouettes in natural history. A design that still looks like it should be alive somewhere. Ichthyosaurs looked like dolphins, yet evolved from land reptiles. They are one of evolution's most astonishing reruns. A reptile lineage sculpted into a dolphin-like form because the ocean rewards sleek efficiency. Their bodies became streamlined for speed. Their tails powered strong thrust, and their flippers offered fine control, turning them into fast hunters of open water. Some species had enormous eyes, suggesting deep dives or hunting in dim conditions, where seeing a flash of movement could mean survival. It is captivating because it shows that similar environments can shape very different ancestors into similar outcomes. You could place an ichthyosaur silhouette next to a dolphin and feel the eerie familiarity. Yet the path that led there was completely separate. Their world was not ours, filled with unfamiliar prey and competitors. But the physics of water pushed them toward a familiar shape. When they disappeared, the ocean later produced other fast swimmers, but the reptile version never returned. It was a successful solution for its time, then gone, leaving only fossils that looked like a borrowed future. The coelacanth was thought extinct, then found alive in the sea. For decades, it existed as a fossil story, a creature sealed into ancient rocks, treated as a symbol of a lineage that had ended. Then, a living one was discovered, and it felt like the ocean had quietly reopened a closed chapter. This fish has fleshy fins that move with a slow, deliberate grace, almost like limbs rehearsing a different way of swimming. It lives in deep, rocky environments where daylight fades and human eyes rarely linger, which helps explain how it escaped notice for so long. The discovery did not mean it was common. It meant it had been surviving in hidden pockets, protected by depth, isolation, and a lifestyle that does not demand frequent change. What makes it so captivating is the emotional jolt it delivers. We like clean endings in nature, but the sea does not always provide them. Sometimes a creature we believed erased is simply out there, continuing quietly, reminding us that the ocean still holds mysteries large enough to rewrite our assumptions. Some extinct sea cows had tusks and grazed underwater meadows. Coastal seagrass beds are like underwater pastures, and sea cows were the gentle grazers that kept them trimmed and thriving. Some extinct forms carried tusks, adding a surprising tool to a seemingly peaceful lifestyle. Those tusks may have helped pull up tougher plants, scrape food loose, or compete during social encounters, turning a calm grazer into a creature with hidden hardware. Picture a large body moving slowly through sunder shallows, stirring sand as it feeds, leaving a wake of drifting particles and newly exposed shoots. That feeding can shape entire habitats, opening space for regrowth and supporting the nurseries where young fish hide. This makes their loss more than a disappearance. It is a change in how coastlines function, because when a major grazer vanishes, part of communities can shift and ecosystems reorganize. These tusked sea cows also remind us that extinct animals were not just bigger or smaller versions of modern ones. They often had unexpected traits that changed how they lived. When they vanished, they took their unique style of underwater grazing with them. The largest pterosaurs had wingspans like small airplanes. Their size still feels unreal because flying gets harder, not easier, as bodies grow. Yet these giants solved it with extreme lightness, hollow bones, and wings formed from a single elongated finger supporting a broad membrane. Launching was the real magic. Instead of flapping from a standstill like most birds, many researchers think they used a powerful vault, pushing off with all four limbs in a spring-like burst that snapped them into the air.
Once airborne, the reward was enormous.
High wingspans can turn into living sailplanes, gliding long distances while spending little energy scanning coasts and floodplains for food. Their fossils hinted animals that could dominate the sky, not through constant flapping, but through smart aerodynamics and confident soaring. It is a reminder that too big to fly is not a rule. It is a challenge. And nature sometimes meets challenges with breathtaking engineering. Quetzalcoatlus likely stalked land like a giant stork with wings. It is easy to imagine it only in the sky, yet one of the most compelling ideas is that it spent much of its time on the ground, striding across ancient landscapes like a tall, alert hunter. Its long neck and beak point to an animal capable of snapping up small prey with fast precision, while its great height may have allowed it to scan wide stretches of land for movement. Picture a dry plain after rainfall, shallow pools and puddles scattered everywhere, with this immense winged creature stepping carefully, looking down, then striking the ground like a spear. With its wings folded, it would have appeared even more unusual, like a walking tent made of muscle and membrane. It may have functioned as both scavenger and hunter, using whatever the land provided, then taking to the air when necessary. The most astonishing element is the scale. This was not simply a bird. It was something altogether different. A flying animal that may have behaved like a land predator, combining power from the sky with strategy on the ground. Archaeopteryx blended teeth and feathers, softening the boundary between dinosaurs and birds. Few fossils feel as iconic, because this one stands exactly on a line we once believed was sharply defined. It carried feathers suited for flight or display. It also had teeth and a long, bony tail, features that feel more ripped alike to modern eyes. What makes it fascinating is not just the anatomy, but the message. Birds did not simply appear. They emerged through gradual change, with intermediate forms that were perfectly real animals, not half-finished experiments. In its world, feathered creatures were exploring new ways to move, climb, glide, and possibly flap into the air. The presence of claws on its wings hints hookup points for branches and trunks. A life that may have included scrambling and short flights rather than effortless soaring. When you look at this fossil, you are seeing a transition made tangible. A snapshot of evolution building a new kind of animal while still carrying older traits along for the ride. Hesperornis was a toothed diving bird that swam with powerful legs. This bird rewrites expectations because it was built for water with the determination of a seal. Yet it was undeniably a bird.
Its legs were set far back on the body, a perfect arrangement for driving through water and a clumsy one for walking on land. It likely launched into lakes and coastal seas and became a sleek underwater hunter, kicking hard and steering with precision. The teeth had another twist. Instead of a beak designed purely for pecking or snipping, it carried toothy jaws suited for gripping slippery fish that would otherwise wriggle free. Imagine the chase below the surface. A sudden burst of leg power, a snap, and a fish trapped in a mouth that looks almost prehistoric. It lived in a time when oceans and shorelines hosted strange mixes of familiar and unfamiliar creatures, and this bird fit right in. Its story shows that birds experimented wildly, and that the line between modern and ancient can run straight through a set of teeth. Titanus was a terror bird that reached North America from the south. This predator feels like a storm made into an animal.
Tall, fast, and built to intimidate. It belonged to a group of flightless hunters, famous for speed and heavy skulls. And it later appeared in North America after traveling north from South America, following new land connections and expanding its range. Picture the drama of that arrival. A new upright hunter stepping into ecosystems already packed with unfamiliar competitors. Its legs suggest it could cover ground quickly, turning open habitats into running arenas where prey had little time to react. The head and beak with a centerpiece built for delivering powerful strikes that could injure, stun, or tear. What makes Titanus so captivating is the sense of movement in its story. It was not a local oddity trapped on one island or valley. It was a traveler, a predator that crossed continents and tested itself in new territory. Then it vanished, leaving behind a fossil echo of a bird that lived like a land-based chase scene. Arantavis was a giant, soaring bird, riding winds like a living glider. Its wings were built for a sky strategy that feels almost peaceful. Not frantic flapping, but mastering air the way sailors master sea. With a massive wingspan and a body tuned for lift, it likely launched when winds were favorable, climbing on rising air and traveling long distances with minimal effort. Imagine standing on a rocky slope and watching a shadow slide across the ground, then looking up to see an enormous bird circling, without a single wing beat, simply reading invisible currents. Such a lifestyle changes everything about how an animal eats and survives. It can patrol huge areas, arrive first at carcasses, or spot opportunities from far away. But it also depends on open landscapes and reliable wind patterns. This bird reminds us that gigantism can work in the air when physics is respected and when behavior is smart. It was not just big.
It was adapted to be big in a way that turned the atmosphere into a highway.
The demon duck of doom was a huge bird with a crushing beak. Despite the playful nickname, the reality was serious. This was a heavy-bodied bird with a skull built for force and a beak that could crush rather than delicately pick. Its exact diet is still debated, which makes it even more intriguing. It may have been a powerful plant eater, capable of breaking tough vegetation, or an opportunistic feeder that could take small animals when the chance arose. Either way, it was not a creature you would casually approach. Imagine encountering it in ancient woodlands,
tall and thick-necked, with each step sounding solid, and a head that looks more like a toll than a face. The beak would have shaped its world, letting it access foods others could not, and giving it confidence in confrontations. This kind of bird shows how evolution can build strength without claws or fangs, turning a beak into the main weapon and survival kit. When such animals disappear, they take a whole style of power with them. Some extinct owls on islands evolved to become flightless hunters. On islands, the rules can change so much that even a creature defined by flight can give flight up. When predators are scarce and food is close, wings can become less necessary and bodies can shift towards stronger legs and sturdier builds for life on the ground. Imagine an owl that still hunts with silent precision, still has the intense, forward-facing gaze, but moves through undergrowth rather than swooping from branches. On some islands, prey can be abundant and unafraid. And the advantage goes to an ambush hunter that can stalk quietly and strike at close range. Flightless owls also highlight a fragile bargain. Losing flight can make a species wonderfully adapted to a safe island, and dangerously vulnerable the moment new predators arrive, such as cats, rats, or dogs brought by humans. Their story is a lesson in how isolation can produce marvels that are perfectly suited to one place and nowhere else. It is also a reminder that evolution does not aim for what we think is better. It aims for what works right now. Giant swans once lived in Malta, larger than modern swans. It is strange to think of Malta not just as a human crossroads, but as a home for outsized birds. Island conditions can push animals towards surprising sizes, and in the past, swans there grew bigger than the familiar forms gliding on today's lakes. A larger body can mean stronger legs, greater ability to defend territory, and a different balance between walking and flying. Some island birds also become less reliant on flight when they do not need to escape many threats, which can allow weight and size to increase over time. Picture a swan that feels more like a small feathery draft animal, still elegant on water, but imposing on land, with a presence that would make modern geese look modest. These swans were part of an island world full of unique twists shaped by limited space and unusual pressures. Their extinction reminds us that islands are both creative and cruel. They generate distinctive life forms, then erase them quickly when conditions change. New Zealand's Atabil was a chunky bird with a heavy, chopping beak. This bird looked built for work. Its body was stout, its legs strong, and its beak was not slender or delicate, but thick and shaped for impact, more like a tool than an ornament. That beak likely helped it dig, pry, and chop into tough material, possibly tearing apart rotting wood or soil to reach hidden food. Imagine it in a forest understory, moving methodically, hammering and levering at the ground, uncovering insects, worms, and other buried meals that smaller birds could not reach. New Zealand's long isolation produced many unusual birds, and this one fit the theme perfectly. A ground-dwelling specialist with a niche that sounds almost like a woodcutter's job description. Such specialization can be brilliant in a stable world because it lets an animal become extremely good at one lifestyle. But it can also be fragile if habitats shift or new predators arrive. When the antsil vanished, it took away a unique kind of forager, a bird that turned a forest floor into its personal workshop. Diplodocus had a tail that may have cracked like a whip. A creature this long needed more than size to stay safe, because a huge body is also a huge target. One of its most fascinating features is the tail, a tapering lash made of many vertebrae that narrows to a fine tip. If swung fast enough, that tip could have made a sharp crack, not unlike a whip, startling predators and signaling to other members of the herd. Even if it did not break the sound barrier, the tail would still have been a serious defensive tool, able to deliver painful strikes at close range without the animal needing to turn its entire body. Picture a predator creeping in, expecting a slow reaction, only to meet a sudden snapping sweep that turns the space behind this giant into a danger zone. The tail also could have served as communication, sending visual cues across distance in dusty floodplains. It is a reminder that even peaceful plant eaters often carry surprising ways to say very clearly, "Keep back." Stegosaurus had a brain smaller than many people expect. People often imagine big dinosaurs as big thinkers, but this animal challenges that assumption in a memorable way.
Its brain was small compared to its body, which sounds like a flaw until you consider what it actually needed to do each day. Survival can be built on sturdy instincts, reliable senses, and a body designed to discourage trouble. This dinosaur carried tall plates along its back and a spiked tail built for defense, turning itself into an unappealing target. A small brain did not mean it was helpless. It likely navigated familiar feeding routes, recognized threats, and reacted quickly when danger appeared. Many modern animals thrive with brains that prioritize essential behaviors over complex planning, especially when their bodies already provide protection. The mismatch between its size and its brain also teaches a useful lesson about judging intelligence. Big does not automatically mean clever, and small does not automatically mean simple. In this case, evolution invested in armor and deterrence, letting the body do much of the thinking.
Triceratops lived closer to humans than to Stegosaurus in time. This is one of those timeline facts that makes the past feel suddenly less tidy. In our minds, dinosaurs often blur into one era, as if they all shared the same world at once. But the age of dinosaurs stretched across an enormous span, long enough for many different chapters of evolution, climate, and geography. By the time this horned giant walked its floodplains, stegosaur-like dinosaurs were already deep in history, separated by a gulf of time far larger than most people imagine. That distance matters because it reframes what dinosaurs are. They are not a single cast, but a long-gunning story with changing characters, new body plans, and shifting ecosystems. It is like comparing early sailing ships to modern jets and calling them the same technology. When you picture these animals together, it is like picturing humans sharing streets with woolly mammoths and ancient trilobites at the same time.
The true story is deeper, more complex,
And much more unexpected.
Spinosaurus was adapted for life in water in a way few giant predators ever were. Most famous massive hunters are designed for land, built to run, grapple, and dominate dry terrain. This one appears to have turned toward rivers and wetlands instead, shaped for a life where water was not a barrier, but a benefit. Its body proportions, heavy bones, and unusual tail form all point toward an ability to swim, while its long snout and cone-shaped teeth suggest a way of life that involved catching slippery prey. Picture a predator that does not need to pursue across open plains because it can wait along channels and floodplains where fish and other animals are forced to pass. The tall sail along its back remains an open question, but it would have made its outline unmistakable, a fin-like ridge moving above reeds and shallow water.
This creature's story is compelling because it overturns the familiar movie image of a giant predator. It hints at ambushes rising from dark rivers, at hunts marked by splashes instead of footsteps, and at an ecosystem where danger could emerge from below the surface. It is a reminder that, even among giants, nature avoids fits-all solutions. Ankylivores carried bony armor like a living medieval shield. These dinosaurs looked less like animals and more like walking fortresses.
Their backs were covered in plates and knobs of bone, and in some species, the tail ended in a heavy club that could swing with decisive force. The effect was psychological as well as physical. A predator choosing targets would have to weigh risk carefully because biting into armor wastes his energy, and one well-placed tail strike could break bones. Imagine the scene at ground level. A low, wide herbivore moving steadily through vegetation, unhurried, because its body is built to discourage trouble. Even the head could be protected with thick skull features and the posture that kept vulnerable areas low and guarded. What makes this armor especially fascinating is that it represents a different evolutionary strategy than speed or size. Instead of outrunning danger, it carried safety everywhere it went. That choice shaped the animal's entire lifestyle, from how it moved to where it fed. When we find these fossils, we are not just meeting a dinosaur, we are meeting an idea. Survival through defense turned into bone. Parasaurolophus had a hollow crest that could amplify cause. Its backward curving crest is one of the most recognizable dinosaur features. And it was not just a fancy headpiece. The inside contained hollow passages connected to the nasal area, which could have influenced sound like a natural instrument built into the skull. That means this animal may have communicated across distance with deep, resonant calls that traveled through forests and over floodplains. Picture a herd moving through misty morning air, and a low, echoing note rolling outward as individuals keep track of one another, warn of danger, or advertise strength. The crest may have also helped with species recognition, making sure the right animals found the right mates in crowded ecosystems where many similar herbivores lived side by side. What makes this so captivating is the idea of dinosaurs as soundscapes, not silent monsters. It invites you to imagine the ancient world not only as a visual scene, but as a place filled with calls, rumbles, and distant replies. The crest becomes a reminder that communication can be just as important as teeth or claws. Titanosaurs evolved body plants that supported a truly colossal size. Some animals get big, but titanosaurs went into a realm where size becomes its own environment. Their skeletons show a design that could support enormous mass without collapsing under it, with pillar-like limbs and bodies balanced to move steadily rather than quickly. Being that large changes everything. It can deter many predators, widen feeding options, and allow travel across long distances to find new vegetation. Yet, it also demands constant intake of food and a digestive system capable of turning tough plants into usable energy. Imagine a landscape where these giants move like slow-moving weather systems, their footsteps compressing soil and their feeding reshaping tree lines. Their young began small, which is another astonishing twist. A creature that ends life as a colossus starts as something vulnerable, and that makes growth itself a survival race. Titanosaurs are fascinating because they show what happens when evolution pushes the plant-eater strategy to its extreme. Be so large that the world must accommodate you, and then build the anatomy to make that possible. Their fossils feel like architecture, proof that life once constructed creatures on a scale that borders on the unreal. Some dinosaurs nested in colonies, guarding eggs like modern birds. The popular image of dinosaurs often skips over family life, but nesting sites reveal a different story. In some places, paleontologists have found clusters of nests close together, suggesting many individuals return to the same area to lay eggs season after season. That kind of colonial behavior can offer safety in numbers, with many eyes watching for threats and the confusion of a crowd making it harder for predators to succeed. It also hints at social structure, at routines, and perhaps even cooperation. Some nests show signs that adults stayed nearby and that hatchlings did not immediately scatter, implying a period of protection or guidance. Imagine a wide nesting ground filled with shallow depressions, eggs carefully arranged, and adults moving among them, alert and restless.
The sounds would have been constant calls, shuffling, the rustle of bodies, and the sudden tension of a threat approaching. This idea makes dinosaurs feel less like distant monsters and more like animals with recognizable life cycles invested in the next generation. It also reminds us that behaviors do not fossilize easily, so each nesting discovery is like overhearing a conversation from deep time. Fossilized skin impressions show many dinosaurs were textured, not scaly stereotypes. For a long time, dinosaurs were pictured as uniformly reptilian, covered in simple scales like oversized lizards. Skin impressions complicate that image in the most delightful way. In some fossils, the surface preserves pebbly patterns, larger feature scales, or unexpected textures that suggest different regions of the body carry different fabric, much like modern animals do. This matters because skin is not just a covering. It affects heat management, display, camouflage, and even how an animal feels in motion. A textured hide can break up outlines, reduce glare, and protect against scrapes in dense vegetation. These impressions also make dinosaurs feel suddenly real and tangible, less like museum skeletons and more like living bodies that once flexed, healed, and aged. There is something intimate about seeing the imprint of skin in stone, like a fingerprint left by a creature that never knew it would be studied. It invites you to imagine sunlight on a patterned back, mud drying in tiny grooves, and the look of an animal standing still, perfectly blended into its world. The stereotype melts away, replaced by texture, variety, and surprise. Neanderthals made complex tools and survived harsh Ice Age climates. They were not clumsy brutes stumbling through snow. They were skilled, adaptable humans who lived through cold swings and unpredictable seasons, often in environments that demanded cleverness every day. Their toolkits show planning and precision, with stone shaped for specific tasks, and evidence that they knew how to make fire, manage shelter, and use local materials efficiently. Their bodies were built for cold, compact, and strong, conserving heat and powering through rugged terrain. But their survival was not just physical, it was social. Life in harsh climates favors cooperation, shared knowledge, and group protection, and the undertolds likely relied on all of that. The fascination comes from how close they feel. They were not a different kind of creature. They were another kind of human, with their own culture and solutions, living for a long time in places where many modern people would struggle without gear. When you imagine a wind-cut valley and a small group moving confidently through it, you get a sense of how capable they truly were. Denise are known mostly from tiny bones and ancient DNA. It sounds impossible that a whole kind of human could be revealed from fragments. Yet, that is exactly what happened. Denise first stepped into scientific awareness through a few small remains and genetic material preserved well enough to read like a message in a bottle from deep time. Instead of full skeletons, we have traces that require detective work, where identity comes from invisible code rather than obvious anatomy, that makes them feel mysterious in a special way. They were real people, living, adapting, and spreading across parts of Asia. Yet their story is stitched together from whispers rather than clear portraits. Ancient DNA shows that their legacy did not vanish completely. Some living humans carried Denise of an ancestry, meaning encounters happened, families formed, and histories intertwined.
The idea is breathtaking. Extinct humans are not only in museums, they are also in genomes, still traveling through generations. And so remind us that the human story is not a single line. It is a braided river with channels we are only beginning to map. Giant marsupials once filled Australia's plains like living tanks. Australia's ancient landscapes were not just home to kangaroos and wombats. They supported heavy, powerful marsupials so large that the ground itself must have felt different under their footsteps. Picture open plains and woodland edges where bulky herbivores moved slowly but confidently, their size offering protection and their feeding shaping the vegetation around them.
In a world without many large placental mammals, marsupials expanded into roles that elsewhere might be filled by hoofed animals, creating an ecosystem that was uniquely Australian in its design. These giants were not monsters, but they would have looked astonishing, like familiar animals turned up to a scale that feels unreal. Their presence would have influenced everything from plant growth patterns to predator behavior, and even the way waterholes became crowded meeting points. The fascination is that this world existed recently enough to leave rich fossil evidence. Yet, it is completely gone from modern experience. When these marsupials vanished, Australia did not just lose species. It lost an entire weight class of wildlife, leaving the continent's modern fauna feeling lighter, quicker, and less gigantic than its own past. The diprotodon was a wombat relative as big as a rhinoceros.
Imagine a wombat stretched and thickened until it becomes a true megaporna giant, a broad-bodied grazer with the presence of a living boulder. Diprotodon was the largest known marsupial, and its size suggests a life of steady movement through Australian landscapes, feeding on tough vegetation and traveling between water sources. A creature that massive changes the environment simply by existing, trampling paths, opening patches in vegetation, and shaping where plants can regrow. Its name hints at its front teeth, and those teeth would have been essential tools for cropping and processing fibrous plants in a climate that could swing between wet abundance and harsh dryness. To stand near such an animal would be to feel the scale of Australia's lost world, where marsupials filled roles we often associate with elephants or rhinos elsewhere. Its disappearance is one of the great vanishings of the continent, likely tied to a combination of climate shifts and human arrival.
When it went, it took away a gentle giant that had been part of Australia's ecological architecture for a very long time. Gypodons were armadillo cousins, shaped like walking stone domes. These animals looked like nature decided to build a tank out of an armadillo blueprint. Their bodies were wrapped in a rigid shell, a heavy dome of bony plaits that turned the back into near impregnable protection. Instead of curling up like many smaller armadillos, a gypodon carried its defense like a permanent fortress, moving through ancient South American habitats with slow certainty. That armor came with trade-offs. It made them sturdy but not nimble, and it likely shaped how they fed, traveled, and responded to danger. You can picture a predator circling, looking for a weak point, while the armored herbivore simply continues, trusting its shell to do the arguing. Some species also had protective features around the tail, turning the rear into another defended zone. Their fossils are especially striking because the shell is so complete and so solid, like a piece of architecture rather than a body. Gypodons remind us that evolution explores extremes. Instead of speed, it can choose armor. Instead of hiding, it can choose to become unbreakable, at least for a while.
The giant armadillo, Dodicurus, had a spiked tail like a mace. If Gudons were living domes, this one carried a weapon to match. The tail ended in a heavy club ringed with spikes, turning the back end into a swinging danger zone. That is a remarkable choice for a herbivore, and it suggests a world where defense needed to be decisive. A spiked tail can deter predators, not by making you hard to bite, but by making you dangerous to approach. Imagine the tension of a large carnivore trying to find an opening, only to face the threat of a single tail swing that could injure legs or break bones. This tail was not a delicate display.
It was built like a medieval weapon, powered by strong muscles and a heavy frame. The rest of the animal was also robust, with a protective shell that added to its confidence. Together, armor and weapon make a compelling story of survival strategy. A plant eater that did not rely on running away. It relied on standing its ground, with biology turned into hardware. Its extinction leaves behind a startling reminder that the Ice Age was not only about predators. Prey animals could be armed too. Ancient horses vanished from the Americas, then returned with humans. It feels strange because horses seem so tied to the American West. Yet the deeper story is more dramatic. Horses evolved in North America over millions of years, spreading and diversifying, becoming part of the continent's natural heritage long before human history. Then, near the end of the Ice Age, they disappeared from the Americas entirely. The reasons are still debated, likely involving rapid environmental change and pressure from hunting and shifting ecosystems. For thousands of years, the continent had no horses at all, meaning the landscapes we imagine with hoofbeats and herds were silent of them. Then humans brought horses back, reintroducing an animal that was both familiar in the fossil record and completely absent in living memory. That return reshaped cultures, travel, hunting, and even the movement of ideas. Because a horse changes how far a person can go in a day, this is one of the most fascinating loops in natural history. A species evolves in a place, disappears, and then arrives again through human hands, becoming iconic in the very land where it once went extinct. Camels once lived in North America before they disappeared there. Camels are often pictured in deserts far away, but their ancient roots trace back to North America, where early camel relatives evolved and spread. That alone reshapes the mind, because it turns what feels like an exotic animal into a native chapter of American prehistory. These camels occupied a wide range of habitats, including grasslands and open regions, adapting to climates that were often cooler and more variable than the deserts we associate with camels today. Over long spans of time, some camel lineages moved into Asia and South America, where their descendants persist as modern camels and llamas. Meanwhile, the camels of North America disappeared, likely as part of the same broad wave of Ice Age losses that claimed many large mammals. So the continent that gave rise to the camel ultimately ended up without any camels at all. The intrigue lies in that twist of fate. It shows how migration can preserve a lineage in one place while it vanishes in the land where it began. It also serves as a reminder that modern animal maps are only temporary snapshots, not fixed truths. The past drew its boundaries differently.
The giant wombat-like Zygomaturus once browsed Australia's forests long ago. It was a hefty marsupial, with a body built for steady feeding, a creature that would have moved through woodlands and forest edges like a slow, deliberate grazer. Its shape suggests strength over speed, with a sturdy frame suited to pushing through vegetation and reaching food in dense environments. In a landscape that also held other large marsupials, it would have been part of a community of big-bodied plant eaters, each carving out its own role in what to eat, where to roam, and how to survive dry seasons. The image is fascinating because it expands what wombat-like can mean. Modern wombats are compact and charming, but this was a heavier, more imposing version of that general design. A reminder that Australia's marsupial toolkit once produced giants as well as small borrowers.
Its disappearance fits the broader pattern of Australia's megapora losses, which likely involved a mix of changing climate, shifting fire regimes, and human pressure. When it vanished, the forests lost one of their large browsers, and the continent lost another piece of its strange, oversized past. Island dwarf elephants evolved to be small where food was scarce. On some islands, elephants followed an evolutionary rule that feels like a plot twist. When resources are limited and space is tight, being enormous stops being an advantage. Over many generations, natural selection favored smaller bodies that needed less food, matured faster, and could survive lean seasons without exhausting the island's vegetation. The result was a miniature elephant, still unmistakably elephant in skull and posture, but scaled down into something closer to a pony in size. That change was not a single dramatic leap. It was a slow negotiation with the island pantry where every calorie mattered. These dwarf elephants also reveal how flexible large mammals can be when the environment demands it. Their bones capture a quiet bargain between grandeur and efficiency. And because islands are finite worlds, once humans arrived with hunting pressure and habitat disturbance, these smaller elephants often had nowhere to retreat. They were perfectly adapted to their island and tragically vulnerable to sudden change. Some island rats grew enormous when predators were missing. Rats are usually imagined as small, quake, and cautious. But islands can rewrite that script. When top predators are absent and food is reliable, there is less reward for staying tiny and skittish. Over time, some rat populations evolved into hefty, confident giants, built less for hiding and more for steady foraging. A larger body can store energy, handle tougher foods, and compete more effectively, especially in island ecosystems where a few dominant species can control key resources. The strange part is how quickly this can happen in evolutionary terms, because rodents reproduce fast and adapt quickly. Imagine walking through an island forest and encountering a rat that moves more like a small mammal you would respect, not avoid. But the same isolation that allows giant forms to evolve can also make them fragile. When new predators arrive, or when invasive competitors and diseases appear, the traits that once helped can become liabilities. Island gigantism is both a triumph and a trap, and these oversized rats show how sharp that edge can be. Madagascar lost giant birds, giant lemurs, and pygmy hippos. Madagascar is famous for living lemurs and strange wildlife, yet its recent past was even more dramatic, filled with large animals that no longer exist. The disappearance matters because it likely rewired the island's ecosystems, changing how seeds moved, how forests regenerated, and which plants thrived. When big fruit eaters vanish, some trees lose their best dispersers, and the forest's future can quietly shift in composition and structure. The evidence comes from subfossils, cut marks, charcoal layers, and changing sediment records that hint at a period of intense transition where human activity and environmental stress overlapped. What makes this especially haunting is that Madagascar's biodiversity is already unique, built to long isolation. So losing large species there is not like losing a common piece from a global puzzle. It is more like losing rare pages from a one-of-Ike manuscript. The island still feels magical today, but its vanished giants remind us it was once stranger, heavier, and even more alive with large bodies. Overhunting and climate shifts often teamed up to erase Megapora. Extinction is rarely a single villain, and Megapora losses often look like a two-punch sequence.
Climate change can shrink habitats, alter vegetation, and disrupt water availability, pushing large animals into smaller, less stable ranges. Then, hunting pressure, even if it is not constant, can become the tipping factor because big animals tend to reproduce slowly and cannot quickly replace losses. The result is a dangerous feedback loop. Fewer animals means fewer chances to find mates, weaker resilience to disease or drought, and higher risk from every bad season. What makes this combination so powerful is timing. A population can survive either stress for a while, but when both arrive together, the margin for error disappears. It is like walking a tightrope while the wind is rising. This idea also reframes Megapora as victims of circumstance, not just of weakness. Many were successful for long stretches engineered for their environments until conditions changed faster than biology could keep up.
Understanding that partnership of pressures helps explain why extinctions can cluster in bursts rather than trickle evenly through time. A single feather can reveal an extinct bird's color through fossil pigments. For a long time, extinct animals were imagined in dull browns and grays because color rarely fossilizes. Then, scientists began finding microscopic structures in fossil feathers that relate to pigments, allowing careful inferences about color patterns. Tiny melanosomes, which in living birds help create blacks, browns, and some shimmering effects, can sometimes be preserved as detailed shapes and arrangements. By comparing those patterns to modern feathers, researchers can estimate whether an ancient bird had dark flight feathers, lighter patches, or glossy contrasts. This is thrilling because color is not a trivial detail. It can signal mating displays, camouflage, social status, and species recognition. Suddenly, fossils feel less like bones and more like living creatures with style and strategy. A single preserved feather can act like a time capsule of appearance, offering a glimpse of how an extinct bird may have looked in sunlight. It also reminds us that the fossil record is not just about skeletons. Sometimes it holds the soft, delicate clues that bring an entire animal into sharper focus. Ancient DNA can map family trees for species gone for thousands of years. DNA is fragile, and time usually shreds it. Yet in cold, dry, or protected conditions, fragments can survive long enough to be read. By piecing together many short sequences and comparing them to DNA from living relatives, scientists can reconstruct relationships, migrations, and population splits that happened far back in time. This turns bones and teeth into biological archives, revealing which populations were closely related, which were isolated, and how diversity rose and fell before extinction. It could also uncover surprising connections, like hidden branches that never made it into the fossil spotlight. The process is delicate, requiring strict controls to avoid contamination, because modern DNA can easily overwhelm ancient traces. When it works, the reward is extraordinary. A family tree built not from guesses, but from the inherited code that once ran inside living cells.
Ancient DNA does not simply tell us what an animal was. It can show where its ancestors traveled, how its population changed, and how extinction erased not one line, but many distinct genetic stories. Some extinct animals are known from just one bone fragment. It is both thrilling and unsettling that an entire species can be proposed from a single piece of evidence: a tooth, a jaw sliver, a fragment of limb. In paleontology, that fragment can become the holotype, the reference specimen that defines the species' name.
If the bone carries a unique combination of features, it may justify a new species, even if the rest of the body remains unknown. But this also creates scientific drama. Later discoveries can confirm the species, merge it with another, or overturn the original idea if the fragment turns out to be variation within a known animal. The public often imagines fossils as complete skeletons. Yet much of the field works with scraps, comparing shapes, textures, and tiny anatomical details with intense care. A single fragment can launch decades of debate and new expeditions because it hints at an animal that once existed beyond the edge of our current knowledge. It is a reminder that the past is not fully recovered. Sometimes it is only teased into view, one bone at a time. Fossil footprints can preserve a moment of panic, chase, or migration. Bones tell you what an animal was, but footprints can show you what it was doing.
A trackway can reveal speed changes, turns, stumbles, and group movement, like a frozen scene pressed into ancient mud. Closely spaced prints can suggest running, while a sudden shift in direction can hint at pursuit or alarm. Parallel trackways can show animals moving together, perhaps migrating or traveling as a group, while mixed tracks from different species can imply shared watering sites or tense encounters. Footprints also capture animals that rarely fossilize as skeletons, offering evidence of presence where bones never survived. The magic is that tracks are timestamps of behavior, not just anatomy. You can stand where the animal stood, place your hand in the same imprint, and feel the scale of a step taken long ago. In some sites, tracks preserve multiple layers, like pages, showing repeated visits across seasons. They remind us that extinction erased lives in motion, and sometimes the ground kept the last moving record. Amber can trap tiny extinct creatures in lei-like detail. Amber begins as sticky tree resin, and in the right conditions, it hardens and survives for immense spans of time. When small creatures get caught in it, the preservation can be astonishing, keeping fine hairs, delicate wings, and even tiny expressions frozen mid-moment. This is not a simple flattened imprint. It can appear like a tiny museum specimen sealed behind a golden window. Amber often traps entire micro-ecosystems: insects, spiders, grains of pollen, fragments of leaves, and droplets that hint at ancient forests and their seasonal rhythms. It reveals a small world that bones usually fail to capture. The constant crawling and fluttering life that quietly supports larger food webs. You are not only looking at an extinct species, you are seeing a specific individual at a precise moment, caught in an ordinary day that suddenly became timeless. Amber also reminds us that extinction is not only a story of large animals. Countless tiny species also emerged and vanished, and some are preserved with striking intimacy, as if the past refused to let them fade. Coprolites, fossilized droppings, can reveal what vanished animals truly ate. It may sound unglamorous, but fossil feces
are among the most direct evidence we have of ancient diets. Unlike teeth, which suggest what an animal might eat, coprolites can show what it actually did eat. Inside, scientists can find plant fibers, bone fragments, fish scales, seeds, and even parasite traces, turning one lump into a snapshot of daily life that can reveal surprising behavior, like a predator that occasionally scavenged, or an herbivore that relied heavily on a particular plant during certain seasons. Coprolites can also hint at ecosystems, showing which plants were present in a region and how food moved through the landscape.
Sometimes they preserve microscopic details, helping reconstruct digestion, gut health, and environmental conditions. The fascination is that this is evidence an animal produced without intending to leave a legacy. Yet, it can answer questions bones cannot. In a way, it is the most honest fossil. It does not pose, it reports. And it reminds us that extinction erased not only bodies, but routines, meals, and the ordinary rhythms that made an animal's life real. Ancient cave art may depict extinct animals with surprising accuracy. Long before field guides and documentaries, people recorded their world with pigment, stone, and patience. Some cave paintings show animals with proportions and details that match extinct species in ways that feel almost impossible. From the slope of a back to the curve of horns. These images were likely drawn from observation, not fantasy, because hunters and gatherers lived close to the herds they depended on and the predators they feared. In that sense, a cave wall can function like a snapshot of a vanished ecosystem, capturing the look and presence of creatures that later disappeared. What makes this especially powerful is the human connection. These were not distant scientific subjects. They were neighbors in a shared landscape important enough to be remembered in art. When you stand before such images today, you are seeing two kinds of evidence at once: the animal's existence and the fact that it was seen, studied, and considered worth portraying with care. The last mammoths survived on islands long after mainland populations vanished. As sea levels rose and coastlines shifted, islands became accidental refuse, cutting off small groups from the wider world. In those isolated pockets, mammoths could persist after mainland populations declined, living out their lives on limited land with limited resources. That isolation came with a cost. Small populations are vulnerable to bad luck, harsh winters, droughts, and reduced genetic diversity, all of which can pile up quietly over generations. On some islands, mammoths even trended smaller, an adaptation that can help when food is scarce and space is tight. The haunting part is that these animals were not mythical holdovers. They were real, breathing giants, living ordinary lives while the rest of the planet moved on without them. Their final disappearance likely involved multiple pressures arriving at once, a narrowing of options until there were none left. Island survival can delay extinction, but it can also turn the last chapter into a fragile balancing act, where a single wobble ends the story. The moa's disappearance reshaped New Zealand's forests and food webs. Remove a giant browser, and the forest does not simply lose an animal, it loses a force. Moa fed on leaves, twigs, and understory plants, and that browsing would have influenced which seedlings survived, how dense certain shrubs grew, and where open patches formed. Their movements likely created pathways, disturbed soil, and helped spread seeds, shaping plant communities over long stretches of time. When the mower vanished, those pressures and services vanished too, and the landscape began to reorganize. Plants that had evolved with heavy browsing may have faced a sudden change in the rules, while other species could spread more freely without being eaten back. Predators linked to mower also lost a key food source, creating knock-on effects that ripple through an ecosystem like falling dominoes. What makes this so fascinating is how slow the reshaping can be. Forests do not change overnight, but over centuries, the absence of a large herbivore can steer the entire trajectory of a habitat. New Zealand today is still beautiful,
Yet it is a version of itself, missing a major architect. When the dio vanished, certain plants may have struggled to spread seeds. On islands, relationships between animals and plants can become unusually tight because there are fewer species to share the work of an ecosystem. Many plants rely on animals to move their seeds, whether by eating fruit and depositing seeds elsewhere, or by carrying them stuck to feathers and feet. If a key disperser disappears, seeds can fall closer to the parent tree, where competition and disease often make survival harder. This is why the dodo's loss has been linked in scientific discussion to the possibility that some island plants faced new challenges once that bird was gone. Even when the details vary from plant to plant, the bigger lesson is clear and unsettling. Extinction can break invisible partnerships that took thousands of years to form. A bird is not only a bird, it is also a courier moving future forests from one place to another. When that courier vanishes, the effect can be delayed, quiet, and profound, like a forest slowly forgetting how it used to renew itself. Some extinctions were so fast they unfolded within a human lifetime. It is easy to imagine extinction as slow, distant, and safely ancient. But history shows it can move with frightening speed. A species can go from abundant to gone in the span of one person's adult years, especially when pressure arrives suddenly and relentlessly. Rapid habitat loss can remove nesting sites or food sources almost overnight. Intense hunting can shatter social breeding systems that depend on large groups. Introduced predators can raid eggs and young in places where native animals never evolved defenses. Disease can spread like wildfire through populations that have no immunity. Once numbers drop low enough, chance becomes deadly. A storm, a dry season, or a few failed breeding years can finish what human activity began. The emotional sting is that people can remember when the animal was common. They can tell stories of it, then watch it vanish anyway. Fast extinctions remind us that rarity is not always a long, slow decline. Sometimes it is a cliff, and the drop can happen while witnesses are still alive. Lazarus species vanish from fossils, then reappear millions of years later. The fossil record is not a complete diary of life. It is more like scattered pages blown across time, with long gaps where nothing was preserved or discovered. Sometimes a group seems to disappear entirely, only to show up again much later in younger rocks, as if it returned from the dead. This is called the Lazarus effect, and it often reflects survival in hidden refuse rather than true extinction and rebirth. A lineage might persist in deep waters, remote regions, or environments where fossils rarely form. It might become rare and localized, leaving so few remains, but we simply have not found them yet.
The effect is thrilling because it hints at unseen endurance, life continuing quietly while the record goes silent. It also makes paleontology feel like detective work, with missing evidence where absence can mislead. Lazarus patterns teach humility. They remind us that finding no fossils in a time interval does not always mean nothing lived there. Sometimes the Earth kept the creature alive, but failed to keep its paperwork. De-extinction efforts aimed to revive traits, not truly resurrect lost species. The popular image is a perfect comeback, as if a lost animal could return exactly as it was. In practice, most projects focus on recreating selected traits using the closest living relatives, because complete genetic blueprints are rarely available, and genetic diversity is impossible to fully restore. That means the result would often be a proxy, an animal engineered to resemble an extinct one in key features, like insulation, body shape, or behavior, rather than a true return of the original species with its full bowel. History. Even if genes can be edited, a species is more than DNA. It is also learned behavior, ecological relationships, and development, shaped by the environment, including the microbes it grows up with. There are also ethical questions about welfare and habitat. Where would such animals live? And what would they do to modern ecosystems that have changed since the extinction? The fascination is that de-extinction forces us to define what we mean by bringing back something lost. It is less a rewind button and more a complex attempt to rebuild a role, using modern tools and modern constraints. Modern museums can rebuild extinct skeletons from thousands of scanned fragments. A fossil discovery does not always arrive as a perfect skeleton. More often, it is shattered, scattered, and incomplete. Like a broken statue buried in rock, modern scanning has transformed what can happen next. High-resolution digital models capture each fragment's shape, allowing researchers to rotate pieces, test fits, and match surfaces without grinding or risking damage. Software can help align fragments, reveal subtle curves, and compare shapes to related species, turning a pile of bone into a solvable puzzle. Missing sections can sometimes be mirrored from the opposite side of the body or carefully inferred, producing a digital reconstruction that can be studied, shared, and revised. Then physical mounts can be built using precise supports and printed components that hold real fossils safely in place. What makes this so captivating is the blend of patience and technology. A museum becomes a workshop of reconstruction, where extinct animals gain posture and presence again. The result is not just a display, it is a new way to meet a vanished creature at full scale, standing as it once stood. Each extinction erases unique genes that can never be reinvented. A species is not only a shape you can see, it is also a genetic library filled with solutions to heat, cold, hunger, disease, predators, and competition, built through countless generations of survival. When extinction happens, that library closes permanently. Another animal might evolve a similar look someday, but it will not carry the same set of genetic strategies or the same evolutionary history. This matters because genes are the raw material of future resilience. They influence immune defenses, metabolism, senses, development, and the subtle traits that let a population cope with change. Losing a species can mean losing options that might have been valuable in a future world, including adaptations we do not yet understand. The tragedy is that this loss is invisible. You can mourn a missing animal, but you cannot easily picture the missing genes that died with it. Yet the narrowing is real. Extinction reduces the diversity of possible responses life can draw on later, like removing tools from a toolbox and hoping the remaining ones will be enough. It turns the living world into a smaller set of experiments, and that reduction cannot be undone. Studying extinct animals helps predict which living species are most at risk. Extinct animals leave patterns behind, and those patterns can be turned into warnings. By comparing many disappearances across time, scientists can identify traits that often predict vulnerability, such as slow reproduction, small geographic range, specialized diets, or reliance on a brave single habitat. Extinction histories also reveal which ecological roles cause cascading damage when they vanish, like major grazers, key seed movers, or top predators that stabilize food webs. This helps modern conservation focus not only on charisma, but on risk and impact. It can guide habitat protection, wildlife corridors, and population management before a decline becomes irreversible. There is also a psychological power in the fossil record. It makes the consequences of inaction concrete. A vanished species is a completed outcome, not a hypothetical. When we understand what pushed past species over the edge, we can watch for the same tipping point today. From rapid habitat fragmentation to sudden disease outbreaks, the hopeful part is that studying extinction is not only about loss, it is about learning in time. The past can function like a rehearsal, showing how collapse happens, so the present has a chance to choose a different ending. As our gentle journey through deep time comes to a close, you may notice how quiet the world feels now. We've wandered through vanished forests and ancient seas, followed heavy footsteps across plains that no longer exist, and glimpsed creatures that once breathed, fed, and moved beneath unfamiliar skies. From towering giants to fragile lives preserved by chance, each story has served as a reminder that Earth is always in motion, slowly revising itself layer upon layer. These extinct animals were not merely curiosities. They shaped landscapes, stirred oceans, trimmed forests, and carried the rhythms of their era. Even in their absence, they leave traces behind, in fossils, in genes, in the living species that came after. Thinking about them can feel humbling, yet also quietly reassuring. Life continues by changing, and every ending becomes the ground from which something new can grow. There is no need now to hold on to every detail. Let them soften and drift away, like footprints slowly filling with sand. Allow your breathing to slow. Feel the surface beneath you, holding your weight without effort. The world beyond this moment can pause. All that matters is this calm space you have made for rest. If you've enjoyed drifting through these ancient stories, you are always welcome to support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a gentle comment. And if you find yourself still awake, another video will appear on your screen, ready to guide you onward into a new, calm exploration. But if sleep is already calling, let it take you gently. Let your thoughts loosen, your body grow heavy, and your mind settle into stillness, as if you're sinking into warm, quiet darkness. Sleep well, and good night.